Hello and welcome to Unit 4 in our Modern Latin American History class. This unit, as you can tell from the title, is all about nationalism. The general time frame that we're going to cover here goes from the earliest parts of the 20th century up through about the Great Depression or so. We're going to be reading, as usual, stories from all around the region, especially as we look in the Chasteen Reader and in Wood. The article by Alan McPherson presents us with women's responses to U.S. military occupation at different places and different moments in the early 20th century. Specifically, he's looking at the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, and Haiti, three places among many others in Latin America that American forces occupied for one reason or another during the early 20th century. So as you read that, you'll be thinking about how U.S. occupations in Latin America were a driving force and a catalyst for promoting nationalism in Latin American nations. As we'll notice, Latin American nationalisms took a variety of different forms. The kind of most prevalent one that we're going to be thinking about in the Chasteen and Wood reading is the Mexican Revolution. So as you think about the ways in which people throughout Mexico, from the middle classes, from the impoverished classes, people who were educated, people who were not, significant leaders like Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata, women like the soldaderas, what was it that drove all of them to resist the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz in 1910, specifically between 1910 and 1920? And then what kinds of national pride helped to put Mexico back together? There have been lots of debates about whether or not the Mexican Revolution was a true social revolution, meaning that it totally transformed society and it totally transformed people's rights and their access to citizenship, versus the idea that it essentially kind of repositioned the status quo, putting other people in charge in a similar format that Porfirio Diaz had held, in which the elites continued to sort of exploit the masses. That seems to be a very bleak perspective on the Mexican Revolution. Having studied this one quite extensively myself and having worked with people like Linda Hall and Alan Knight who have made their careers studying the Mexican Revolution, I tend to see the revolution, if not as a complete social revolution, certainly as something that did attempt to effect important changes. Going back to that idea of nationalism, one of the most important things to consider as you work through this unit is that nationalism was a response in many ways to scientific racism. As we learned was the case with scientific racism, Latin American elites like Porfirio Diaz or Domingo Sarmiento used new scientific ideas such as Darwin's theories on evolution, his cousin Galton's theories about genetics and heredity, and many other new kinds of science to justify the denigration of non-white people and to think about social hierarchies that were based on race. Of course, today, people who study biology would say that race is not a biological concept, there's no science behind it. Instead, it's a social historical construction. And this is really shown by the ways in which nationalism pushed back against scientific racism. For many nationalist leaders, such as Mexican revolutionaries, as well as reformers in places like Argentina and Uruguay, racial intermixture was actually a positive good. It was something that distinguished their nations and distinguished Latin America from the United States or from Europe. And they were saying, no, we're actually stronger because we have racial intermixture, because we have indigenous peoples here who are part of our societies. We need to think about the limits to that as well as we work through this unit. Just because people were saying that doesn't mean that they were actually acting in ways that really performed that. So what I mean is that they didn't all of a sudden see indigenous peoples as worthy of having the same rights, the same wealth, the same access to things that they had, They being mostly educated middle to upper class folks who just were starting to see things in a different way. Um, and so there's that continued tension that's going on through this period of the rise of nationalism. Nationalism, however, is this important turning point to help Latin American nations form their own identities. That process of nation building that we keep coming back to, it doesn't ever quite end. So I want to apologize for the choppiness of this video right here of having some issues that I'm going to correct really quick. But just to finish things out, I think I've hit on all the major points here with nationalism in terms of thinking about how it's a response to scientific racism and how it helped to continue to build nations. I hope that you enjoy reading all of these various perspectives on nationalism in Unit 4.